Hi, my name is Michael Harris. I'm an information architect in Yale ITS on the User Experience and Digital Strategy group. I'm giving a talk on web accessibility today. It's been kind of an interesting topic that's floating around the university, and it would be helpful to sort of have just a sort of a general overview about what it is, why it matters, and what are a few practical things that we can do. I will say that my particular expertise is about accessibility itself and not about university policies surrounding accessibility. So if your question is, what does Yale require? I will not answer you because that's above my pay grade. Like, they don't pay me enough to answer that question. But in all seriousness, if you do have questions like that, I have been given permission to give my boss's boss's email out. That's lisa.sawin@yale.edu. She will answer all of your questions about what you are required to do. She's expecting to get many emails just sort of fielding the question of, well, what does Yale expect? Because that's a dicey issue, and that's in flux, and again, it's above my pay grade, so I'm just going to get that question, I'm going to put that question to bed sort of before it starts. So what we're going to be covering today is sort of what is accessibility and why we should care about it. We're going to talk about what should you know before starting a new web project, and we're going to talk about what you should do if you already have a web project. I've got a lot of stuff to go through. I'm going to get through as much as I can in an hour. I think I can get through all of it. I'll ask that you hold questions until the end, and I'll make sure to save a few minutes for that. So what is accessibility, and why should we care about it? Well, if we look at sort of a building like this, these are stairs. So if I want to get whatever is above sort of uphill in this image, I have to walk up the steps. In order to walk up the steps, I need functioning legs. And that's not something that all humans have. Some people have wheelchairs, some people are paralyzed for whatever degree, some people don't even have legs at all. And so if they needed to access whatever is sort of in this building in the distance, they can't use this method. And if this method is the only method that exists to reach this building, then they can't access what's there at all. It's why we see the proliferation in recent decades of wheelchair ramps, of elevators, of things like that. And these things are now standard in the new buildings that we build. You can't build a building now without having an entrance that can be reached by someone in a wheelchair. So that's sort of a physical example of accessibility. So the idea of digital accessibility is the same principle, but how do we make websites, how do we make electronic resources that are available to people with various disabilities? And we'll talk a little bit about what those disabilities are in a moment. A good analogy for the web is to imagine a book that you can't read. This is sort of what it's like for a blind person to use the internet, or for a blind person to read a book. They can't see the words on a page. If a colleague of mine suggested that if you wanted to listen to the rest of this presentation with your eyes closed to sort of get a sense of what it might be like for a blind person to go about their daily life, that could do it. I picked these images carefully, but if you really want to get the immersive experience, that's okay as well. So if the information that would be in this book, if you can't access it with your eyes, it has to be accessible through one of your other senses, like hearing or like touch. And if it has to be accessible through those senses, that means we have to build it such that it becomes accessible through those senses. It's not automatic. It requires effort, and it requires sort of planning. It requires deliberate priorities. So if you think about a book with sort of no words printed in it, or at least no words that you could see, then you sort of begin to understand the challenges of what it's like to access this information with a disability. We think about, from Tim Berners-Lee, who is the founder of the World Wide Web, he felt very strongly about accessibility. A quotation from him is that the power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. So if the person who sort of founded the World Wide Web thinks it's important for the information found on it to be accessible by everyone, regardless of whether they're blind, whether they're deaf, whether they have some other kinds of disabilities, this is very important. This value is sort of baked into what it is to be on the web, and since this is a website conference, we should adopt that value as well. When we think about disabilities for the web in particular, we tend to break things down into 4 categories. The first category of disability that we think about is visual. That's not just blindness, where you can't see anything, it's also color blindness, and it's also low vision. As people age, or in some sense they can be born with a condition where their entire field of vision isn't available to them and some things are obscured. And so we want to be able to keep everything in mind, not just the strictly blind. We also think of auditory disabilities, mostly deafness. We think about physical and motor disabilities, people who are paralyzed or for whatever reason can't use all of the normal tools that we use to navigate the web, such as a mouse. If you're paralyzed or if you have a strong tremor, using a mouse is very difficult. And so we need to build our websites in a way that they can be used by people who can't use a mouse or by people who have sort of other limited mobility. Another really interesting 4th category of disability is cognitive and neurological. That includes people with sort of comprehension disabilities, people with attention disabilities. Attention deficit hyperactive disorder, ADHD, has been popular, or it's been in the air for several years now. Many of Yale students are sort of diagnosed with that one. So that's something we should keep in mind. People with various problem-solving or cognitive overload disabilities as well. If things are very complicated, they may not be able to sort of problem-solve as effectively as the rest of us. People with seizure disabilities, bright flashing lights, especially if they're quick, might induce a seizure in someone. And then people with short-term memory loss. These are all disabilities we need to plan for when we're creating our websites. So an example of low vision, so there's a disease of the eye called glaucoma, which is when fluid in your eye builds up and it applies pressure to the nerves in your eye, and it gradually reduces your field of vision so that when it's very advanced, you get tunnel vision. This one's especially relevant to me because it runs in my family, and this will probably be how I will be seeing the world when I'm in my 60s. So it's important to plan not just for blindness, but for low vision, sort of like this. Motor disabilities, like we talked about. This is an example of a gentleman who is paralyzed from the neck down, and the way that he interacts with a computer is that he holds a rod in his mouth and he pecks or pokes at a keyboard and at sort of a trackpad on a mouse, and that's how he uses the computer. Imagine not even being able to use your mouse, but not even to be able to use your hands, and being forced to sort of interact in this way, and you can see sort of the limits of what we're having. Interestingly, there are videos of paralyzed people who have to use, this is called a mouth stick, is the official term. People who use mouth sticks, you can watch a few videos of them online using their computer, and if they've been doing it for several years, they can actually become pretty proficient typists. Their words per minute is probably higher than some of the people in this room, especially if you just sort of hunt and peck with your fingers. They can get quite adept at typing very quickly, and they can use the internet. One of the most famous examples of a man with sort of a spinal injury like this, his name is, I'm totally blanking on what his name is. I'll look it up and I'll try to post it when I post the slides later. But he's a web developer. He's a programmer. He's paralyzed from the neck down. He builds all of his websites by having a mouse stick and tapping at the keyboard. So they're certainly able to do the work, but they have to have different interfaces or different ways of using the internet itself. A cognitive disability is dyslexia. It's hard to get an accurate sense of what dyslexia is if you don't have it. But it's been described as letters appearing to shift positions when you're reading. Dyslexic people can read, it just requires more effort. And it's not a disability of intelligence, it's a disability of information processing. Somehow when you look at a screen or when you look at words, the information isn't being encoded the same way that it would if you don't have dyslexia. There's actually a couple of months ago a famous internet visualization that I'll demonstrate for you now of what it's like, a simulation of what it might be like to have dyslexia. So I'm just going to pop over to my browser for a moment. Now trying to zoom in. Oh, shoot. I apologize. Shoot, how do I zoom out? Yeah. So we see it's possible to read what's happening, but it takes a lot of effort because it looks like the letters are shifting around. We can try to read maybe this fourth paragraph down. Dyslexia is characterized by difficulty with learning to read. Yeah, thank you. So we can. So it's possible to read. It just takes effort, and through no fault of intelligence or no whatever. It's just hard. It's important to note that this is not an exact representation of how dyslexics experience the world, and not everyone's dyslexia is the same. But this is a good rough estimation for people who don't have dyslexia, who can sort of try to understand what it's like. So let's go back to my slides. People who have disabilities use assistive technology, which is designed to help them interact in ways that aren't typically supported by how most users without disabilities use it. These include screen readers. These include screen magnifiers, which I was just demonstrating. I'm not very proficient with it because I don't need one, but so you can actually zoom in and make parts of your screen larger. Braille devices, so you can have, if you have a blind person, there will be actually a device that they can run their fingers along that will refresh in real time and actually read the page to them. Captions and transcripts are a way for people with hearing disabilities to encounter the web. Keyboards, mouth sticks like we saw, and voice-activated technologies are ways for, similarly, people with sort of motor disabilities to interact with the web. I'd like to play a short video of what it's like to have a screen reader, so you can see what it's like. A screen reader is a technology for a blind person to have whatever is on the computer screen read aloud to them. It's a different way of processing a web page than you probably are used to, or any visual information. So
VoiceOver on Safari, window, Google, toolbar. http://www.google.com/ highlighted. Apple, P, L, E, period, C, O, M. .html content page has 27 links, 4 auto web spots, 1 form control, 1 visited link, list 7 items, visited link, Apple, blank, store, blank, Mac, blank, iPod plus iTunes, blank, iPhone, blank, downloads, blank, support, search edit text, blank, Mac OS 10 Snow Leopard, now available, blank, hot news headlines, blank, Mac OS 10 Snow Leopard, sleek upgrade, blank, watch the new Mac ads, blank, Apple answers the FCC's questions, blank, the new Final Cut Studio, the year's most stunning new release, blank, buy a Mac for college and get a free iPod, shop fee, blank, Apple online store, 1-800-MY Apple, visit N, blank, Apple retail store, or find a, blank, reseller.
So again, so if I'm blind, this is how I read a web page. I have this voice that sort of says everything to me in sequential order. People who are proficient with screen readers, the speed of the reading back is actually much faster than what we did. That was slowed down so that lay people can understand it. If you've actually listened to a blind person who is proficient with a screen reader use it, it's so fast that to us it would be unintelligible. But because they've been doing this in some cases for many years, this is how they're accustomed to doing it, and so that they're actually very proficient with such a technology. But it's a different way of experiencing a sort of a website than we do, which is primarily visually. So those are the ways that sort of people, those are the technologies that are available. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good. So the question is, how would someone interact with a page if they're using a screen reader? There are very complicated sort of keyboard shortcuts that will allow them to do various things, and I'll have a little bit more information about that later, but that's a really good question. I've tried to learn some of the keyboard shortcuts for VoiceOver, which comes natively on a Mac. It's very difficult to sort of just learn what they are because it's a total paradigm shift. VoiceOver comes default on Mac. JAWS is the name of a software that's very popular on Windows, and there are also a few other softwares, NVDA, Windows Eyes. These are just various screen reader softwares that are available. So when we think about so now that we know sort of what accessibility is and how people sort of use technology to help them, we need to think about, well, so how do we actually do the work of designing a web page or a website in a way that's accessible for people with disabilities? One of the standards, there are many sets of standards, but the one standard I'm going to talk briefly about today is called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. And again, it's just a set of several dozen criteria that a web page should meet in order for it to be accessible. We're currently on version 2 of these guidelines. They came out in 2008. Version 1 came out in 1999. And it's important that this is like a full-time group of people whose job it is to study users with disabilities and how they use computers, so that they have a very deep knowledge of what it's actually like. This is valuable because it saves work from us. We don't have to imagine what is it like for a disabled person to use a website. We can take their word for it, and we can sort of draw on their wisdom and their knowledge. So by using the guidelines that they set forth, that's a pretty good indicator that our website's accessible. It's important to know that accessibility is not an on or off thing. It's a sliding scale. Nothing is completely inaccessible, and nothing is completely accessible. Things can always be better. Things can always be worse. So it's not a yes-no. It's a continuum. But that said, WCAG tries to talk about this continuum in terms of 3 levels: single A, double A, and triple A. Single A being like sort of the very basic, and triple A being an extremely high standard of accessibility. Most people aim for single A or double A. I personally advocate that most websites try to strive for at least AA. Meeting AAA is very, very difficult. Meeting AA is pretty doable with some work. But the important takeaway here is that it's a sliding scale. The WCAG conceptualizes accessibility according to 4 big categories: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. We've mostly been talking about perceivable. That means the information on a website has to be perceivable to you if some of your senses are not available. If you're blind, it has to be perceivable through your ear or your fingers. If you're deaf, it has to be perceivable from your eyes, so on and so forth. Operable applies to those sort of motor disabilities. If I can't use my full range of motion, how can I actually interact with the page? Understandable means your information needs to be clear and simple so that a person can actually make sense of it. And robust just means it needs to be able to work on a variety of browsers, a variety of devices. It would be really unfortunate if you created a website that only worked correctly on Netscape, because again, no one uses that anymore. So on and so forth. If you would like to actually read the standards yourselves, which I do not recommend, save that for me, because this is my job. It's my job to parse these things. You can go to this website. It's really dense. It's really technical documentation. But if you want to get a flavor of what my day-to-day work is like, you can sort of visit this URL. So that's sort of what accessibility is. It's surprisingly not everyone is on board with making the web an accessible place. In fact, when you tell people their websites need to be accessible, there are some pretty frequent objections, and these objections are understandable. They're not sufficient, in my opinion, to persuade me that we shouldn't make things accessible, but they are legitimate concerns that people have when they think about sort of what accessibility is and why should I put in the effort. The first objection to making things accessible is that accessibility only provides limited benefits. It doesn't benefit everyone, it just benefits a very small number of people. So it's a lot of effort for not a lot of payoff and not a lot of value. So this is what so people think, if it affects so few people, why should I put in so much effort? Well, the people it does help, the benefits are really, really important to those people. It may not benefit everyone, but the people it does benefit, it benefits tremendously. It's probably the difference between being a member of society and not. Like that's the scale of accessibility benefits in general. I know that sounds extreme, but it's also kind of true. The United Nations recognizes access to information and communications as a basic human right. So all humans, regardless of their sort of ability status, should be able to access information. So if you're persuaded by the United Nations, we're talking about people's human rights. And so with that perspective, the objection that it only benefits a small number of people isn't quite so persuasive when the people that it does benefit, it's actually granting them their human rights. Accessibility supports social inclusion. We don't interact with a lot of disabled people in our day-to-day life. We don't see a lot of blind people. We don't see a lot of deaf people. We don't see a lot of people in wheelchairs, so on and so forth. We do see some, but for the most part, they're not as integrated into society as they have a right to be, simply because society is not designed to make it so that they can. I mean, these rooms themselves, if you want to get to any of these chairs, you have to walk down steps. If you're in a wheelchair, you can get in the room, but you're probably secluded to a dark area in the back. And even if you can get in the room to hear the talk, you probably can't participate in the conversation as much if this were a more interactive thing. It's good that people in wheelchairs can actually get into this building. They can't even get into all buildings in some cases. So it's actually limiting their ability to participate in society and to participate in life. If we can take a more concrete, so to take a more deeper example, if we want to talk about the social limitations of not designing a society for blind people, I've grabbed some statistics from the National Federation of the Blind of that people with a visual disability, 30% live below the poverty line. The median household income of someone with a visual disability is $36,500 in the United States. That contrasts with $52,000, which is sort of the national household, the national median income. 21.2% of them lack health insurance. 60% do not have jobs. That doesn't mean that 60% are unemployed because unemployment means you have to not have a job but be actively looking for one. So 60% of people just simply don't have jobs. They might be too discouraged to even look for a job. 86% of people with a visual disability do not have a bachelor's degree. So to just talk about the size of the impact for not having sufficient accessibility in the world. So that said, increasing accessibility also benefits people who don't have disabilities. It benefits most normally abled people. Transcripts and captions help everyone. They don't just help the deaf. I normally, when I'm watching TV at home, if there's captions, I turn them on. When I was in college, if there was a transcript to go along with a lecture, I would really enjoy reading the transcript. If I'm in the subway in New York City and I'm trying to watch a video on my phone and I don't want to be obnoxious to the people around me, I'll turn the volume off and I'll read the transcripts as I'm watching. So the benefits aren't just to people with disabilities, it's to everyone. Easier forms to fill out and easier processes to complete online benefit everyone, not just people with disabilities. Things become easier to read if you use a font that everyone can read. And so we've all seen these things. This is an accessibility problem, and fixing it benefits everyone, not just people with visual disabilities. Yeah, like this is awful, and I think we all know that. Another objection to accessibility is people are worried that the cost would be prohibitive. It's like, yes, maybe we should do it, but it would be really, really expensive to do. And there is some, like, this is a valid concern. It does cost some money, but many accessibility benefits don't require special training. They don't require excessive time. They're things that we can all do, such as simplifying the content on our site. Adding descriptive text to our images, using an appropriate heading structure on our web pages. Don't just jump straight for the H5 because you don't like how the H2 looks. So these are things that anyone can do. If you need help, you can go to Yale Sites Training and you can learn how to do these things. It doesn't require a ton of money. It just requires a little bit of time from a non-technical person. We can also minimize costs by planning for accessibility when we start a new project. Rather than trying to build it and then fix it. If we start with accessibility in mind, it's cheaper. A final objection to accessibility is aesthetics. People are worried that accessibility is simply ugly. I'm going to have to use gross fonts. I can't use images. I have to make things look bad. But the fact is, many accessibility improvements are invisible. Such as additional text for screen readers, like we saw with the screen reader reading the web page. You can put information that's only visible to a blind person, but won't be visible to a normally sighted person, so it won't disrupt the aesthetics of your web page. Many visual effects won't even be apparent to normal users who are using a mouse. You can use a keyboard to navigate any website, and visual enhancements for people who only use keyboards, not mouses, are helpful, and they won't be disruptive to sort of the normal aesthetic. Hover states, focus states. Is that your question? People who don't use a mouse, people who just use keyboards? Yeah, so people, that's a really good question. Blind people often don't use a mouse, but they probably don't care about the visual enhancements anyway. If I have a severe tremor in my hand, such that it makes it very difficult to move a mouse to exactly hit a link. Many of us have probably been on our phones and you had to click on something, but it was too small to click on, and you probably just clicked in the wrong place. That same phenomenon happens if you have a tremor in your hand and you can't use the mouse to get directly onto the button and you need to use your tab key. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. We should also think about comparing web accessibility to building accessibility. You might think that a wheelchair ramp looks dumb, but you have to include it. Like we wouldn't say that a new building doesn't have to have a wheelchair ramp just because we don't like how it looks. We would let the functionality argument trump the aesthetic argument for a physical building. We should also let the practicality argument trump the aesthetic argument when it comes to web accessibility as well. We should have the same standard there. So that's sort of an overview of what web accessibility is. You might want to know what you should know about a project. What should you know about accessibility before you start a new project if you have a new website or application? You should learn about your audience. Are there any populations that you need to prepare for? Are you serving students? Are you serving the elderly? Are you serving non-native English speakers? Are you serving people in other countries? Are you serving people on mobile phones? All of these are not categories of disabled people, but many of the accessibility enhancements for disabled people also help the people in these categories. If you're designing for the elderly, there's a higher likelihood that they're disabled than the general public. So you need to know that if you're designing the student registration sort of application, you're probably not serving the elderly as much as you are if you design sort of a general purpose medical website. You'll probably your users might skew older there. So there are different design considerations. If English is not your native language, it takes more effort simply to understand. So writing more simple text on your website makes it easier for non-native English speakers to understand, and for users with cognitive disabilities to understand, and for everyone else to understand as well. Simple things help everyone, not just sort of people in these categories. Accessibility on mobile phones require a little bit of extra effort. So if your application or your website is going to be on a mobile phone, that's sort of a thing to look for. But yes, you should just think about what your audience and who you're trying to serve. You should be honest about your organization. You should know the limits of how much money and manpower you're going to have. You should ask yourself how many people are going to be maintaining a project once it's completed. If you only have a one-person web team, you don't want something as complicated as the new HRAFBO website, which Dana just talked about in this room an hour ago. One person couldn't do that. You need something much simpler. What kinds of expertise will you have? Will you have developers, and will you have designers, and will you have just armies of people who can write good content? Or will you just have a sort of non-technical people for whom maintaining the website is their second or third job responsibility? If you create a website that has sort of more complicated needs and you don't have the human resources to match those needs, you're probably going to fall into some accessibility traps. And you might need to prioritize your needs and requirements. If you discover that your eyes are bigger than your stomach or your budget or your human resources, you need to figure out what's really the most important things. And sort of going through this process about having a reckoning with what your team can actually support will help you avoid accessibility pitfalls, because you won't be creating bad content. You should know what resources are available to help you. Yale ITS is one resource that's available to help you. Yale Sites is a platform that if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, Yale is going to have a permanent dedication to making the platform as accessible as possible as long as it exists at Yale. Simply putting your site on Yale Sites isn't sufficient to make it accessible, but it does get you a lot of the way there. And so that's a really helpful resource, whereas putting your website on a less accessible platform is probably going to give you more problems. The User Experience and Digital Strategy group at ITS offers accessibility consulting and sort of accessibility advice. If you need help, again, that email is lisa.salwin@yale.edu. And if you have a big project and you're worried about accessibility, they'll organize a way for someone to sort of come talk to you and help address your concerns. That person will probably be me. You can talk to vendor management if you're going to sort of bring in an outside person to build your website for you. So we've been coordinating with sort of Ed Fry's group is his name to have the correct language around accessibility in the contract and in the RTF. Usability.yale.edu is a new website that's going to be growing and evolving as Yale's expertise in usability and accessibility grows. But it has resources for web accessibility, and over the next year or so, I'm predicting a lot more resources will continue to be added to this website. The Resource Office on Disabilities is another resource on campus. Most of their work is primarily for students, but their website does have some information about various guidelines and checklists and sort of federal requirements if you want to learn more about accessibility. So the takeaway is you're not completely on your own when it comes to tackling accessibility. Yale has resources to help you, and especially in the starting in the fiscal year 2017, Yale is going to be expanding what those resources offer. Another thing you can do is you can ask the right questions. You should ask the people who are going to be working on your project. If it's a vendor, if you're bringing in a designer, if you're going to bring in a developer, whoever is going to be working on the project, ask them the right questions. Are you familiar with WCAG 2.0? If they're not familiar with accessibility standards, you're probably going to get an inaccessible website because they don't know how to design for those things. Are you familiar with ARIA? ARIA is similar to WCAG 2.0 in that it's a set of standards that helps especially blind users have their screen readers interact with a website more effectively. You don't need to know what ARIA is, you just need to make sure that your developers do. Ask these people, have they done accessibility work before? If they have, if they're comfortable with accessibility, if they're comfortable answering your questions, that's a good sign. If they haven't done the work before, maybe not. And ask them what their process is like for ensuring accessibility. So the kinds of ways where this might make a difference, I have a few examples for you. This is what's currently on the yale.edu homepage. It's that nice big image with some green little monster tadpole looking things right next to it. The link down at the bottom says learn more. If I'm blind and my screen reader is just reading the links to me, I don't know what learn more means unless I have the website coded appropriately. And if you look at the actual HTML source code, you see this thing called ARIA labeled by single underscore flex underscore feature underscore title 6406. That might not mean anything to you, but that's the difference between a blind person understanding your website and a blind person not. So this is why it's important that your developers and vendors understand ARIA. It's also important to make sure that your designers understand how to visually design links. So if we look at this paragraph, I stole this from Peter Salve's bio on yale.edu, we can read this paragraph and we can tell where the links are. They're blue and they're underlined and they're very different from the black text. If we had designed it this way, yeah, you can kind of maybe tell where the links are if you have the full use of your vision. If you have a visual difficulty, you probably can't tell at all. If you're colorblind, this is probably difficult. This is more accessible than this, and this is what you want to aim for. Likewise, so this is about correct styling. We also want correct contrast in our image. I started thinking about this talk around the time of the South Carolina primaries, and after Hillary Clinton won, she released this image. And this is a really bad image if you're colorblind, because if you take this image into Photoshop and you turn it grayscale, it looks like this. The U is very hard to read. South Carolina you can read, but thank you is very hard to read. You would think from the colors that this would be sufficient, but you also have to design for people who are colorblind. That means you need visual designers who understand, who have it as a part of their process to look at their designs in grayscale. And to make sure that the color contrast is appropriate. It's not enough for color to be different. The contrast also has to be sufficiently different. To talk about a different president for a moment, Peter Salve, so this is his webpage, and if we look at this webpage in grayscale, it looks fine. You can still read everything, whereas this image from the Hillary Clinton, you can't because it hasn't been designed correctly. So have your visual designers show you their designs in grayscale to make sure that people with color blindness can still understand. It's also important not to use color alone to convey information. This is a slightly different point than the previous point. But if you're going to convey information through color, you should also convey it in another way. Because again, if I'm colorblind, this is what it looks like. And you simply need to have the people with the expertise to avoid things like this. So these are some things that you maybe want to ask your vendor or your designer if you're starting a new project, but what if you already have a project? What if you already have a website? What should you be doing now? And so I have a few more concrete suggestions for those of you who already have websites. The first is don't abuse the text editor. Use proper heading levels. Many times, so when you go to create a basic page, and you see the body field, and it looks kind of like Microsoft Word, and you can press the buttons at the top, and you can type in your content. Many times what we'll see people do is we'll see them pick a heading level based on how the heading level looks, rather than what the heading level is. And that's, I understand from a visual perspective why you want to do that, but it makes the site harder to understand for someone with disabilities, especially for a blind person. You should construct your web pages like it's a website. You should start with a heading 2. Heading 1 is going to be automatically generated by Drupal as the title of your page. So you should start as a heading 2, and if you need a subsection under your heading 2, use a heading 3. And if you need another section, use another heading 3, and if you need a subsection below that, use a heading 4. I've worked on some of the websites in this room, and I know that some of you have a heading 5 or a heading 6 without a heading 1, 2, 3, 4 sort of above it, and that's not proper. You should use the correct hierarchical order. And if you don't like the visual look and feel, if you don't like the visual look and feel of the heading, the thing to do is to change how the website is coded to change the appearance of the heading, not to change the heading itself. We want to separate how the heading looks from what the heading is, and from an accessibility standpoint, your priority is to worry about what the heading is. Don't use bold when you need to use a heading. If you find yourself using bold a lot, you probably want to be using a heading instead. Because if it's bold, it doesn't tell a blind person that it's bold. The screen reader just reads it to them. Whereas if you use a heading, the screen reader will say, this is a heading. So don't use bold when you mean to use a heading. The text editors allow you to change colors, they allow you to change fonts, they allow you to change backgrounds. Don't do any of that stuff. Leave the defaults. The defaults were picked for a reason, and once you go changing those things, you make your site inaccessible. Don't use tables for layout. If you want things nice and organized in columns, don't use a table to do it. Tables should be used for data. They shouldn't be used to structure things in columns. And that's because, again, if I'm a blind person, my screen reader will see that it's a table, and it will try to explain it to me as if it's a table, and it won't understand that I'm trying to achieve something with layout, not present data. So don't use tables for layout. Don't add styles to your tables. Again, just leave it at the default. Don't underline anything. We have the expectation that underline should be reserved for links. And if you underline other things, people will, some people might think that what's underlined is a link and they'll try to click on it. So if you have the title of a book, use italics. Don't underline it. This is the text editor that I was just telling you not to abuse. Again, use the proper heading. Don't jump down to H6 because you want it small. Start with an H2 and work from there. Something you should do is you should add alt text to your images. Blind people can't see images, so screen readers have to tell them, there's an image on the page, and this is what it's an image of. But if you don't supply the appropriate text, it won't know what it's an image of. If it's an image if the image is informational, you should add alt text. But if the image is purely decorative, you should not add alt text. So the rotating banners at the top of a Yale site, those aren't informational. Those are purely decorative. So you shouldn't include any alt text there. If you do include alt text on an image, don't say image of, or don't say picture of. Just say Peter Salve, Yale's president, or Yale Site's presentation, or describe what it is. You don't have to say that it's a picture. You don't have to say that it's a graph. The screen reader will do that for you. Just describe what's in it. The place to add alt text is if you're inserting an image into your body field. The second column right there says alternative text. That's where you put it. Do make your link text clear. When sighted people read a web page, they don't read every word on it. They just scan. Blind people can also scan a web page by telling their screen reader just to read the links. Don't read me everything, just tell me what links are on this page. And since if a screen reader is only reading the links on the page, the links need to have really good text. So I should be able to tell what a link is out of context. So for example, if I have a sentence like, to fill out the application form, click here. To see instructions for how to fill out the form, click here. We've all seen click here on our websites. Click here is bad, 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 because if I'm using a screen reader and I only ask it to read the links on a page, it'll just read click here, click here. I mean, imagine how frustrating it must be for a blind person to hear, to have the screen reader read click here, click here, click here, without knowing what those are links to. So instead, write your links this way. Applicants should fill out the program application form. Please see the instructions for completing the application form for assistance. So that way, when a screen reader is just reading out the links, they see program application form, pretty clear. Instructions for completing the application form. Click here. The test you want to use is, can I understand what the link is if I don't have any of the surrounding text? This is what you should be striving for. Do simplify your content. Writing for the web is fundamentally different than writing for other media. We need it to be simpler. People at Yale are very, very smart, but don't make them use all of their intelligence just to read your web page. Let them save it for their homework assignments or for the scholarly articles that they're writing. Keep your web pages very simple. Try to keep your paragraphs to about 80 words or fewer, and eliminate the number of complex sentences you have. Keep them really simple. If you can use a list, like a bulleted list, use it. Don't use a paragraph if a list will do. And you should use a reading level estimator, which allows you to paste your text into it, and it'll estimate the reading level of your page. So I'm going to go to Peter Salave's bio on yale.edu. And I'm also going to open up a readability estimator tool, which is readabilityscore.com, and I see I have a place right here where I can paste in some text. So I'm going to go to Peter Salave's webpage, and I'm going to copy and paste his biography. It's going to do its thing, and it's going to estimate how hard it is to read this page. And it's estimating that this page is written at about a 13th grade level. So this page is probably written at a level that's appropriate for a freshman in college. Maybe that's the level you're aiming for. I like to recommend that you try to get this number as low as possible. I can get my numbers consistently to around 9 or 10, like a 9th grade level or 10th grade reading level. If you can get the text on your website down to an 8th grade reading level or below, that's phenomenal. It's very hard to do. But if you're pasting in your text and you're seeing like, 20th grade level, 30th grade level, if your text is meant to be read by someone with 3 PhDs, you need to simplify it. And simplifying it will help everyone, not just people with sort of cognitive disabilities. So that should be the standard that we're going for there. How am I doing on time? I'm doing okay. Do be careful with videos. Try not to use videos on your website unless they're necessary. So if you think to yourself, wouldn't it be cool if I had a video, don't include it. If you think to yourself, the information that I need to convey can only be conveyed through a video, then it's okay. But if it's an accessibility concern to include videos just because you think they're entertaining. So try to avoid them if you can. I'm not saying avoid them all the time. I'm saying try to avoid them if you can. If you do use videos, try to link to a version with captions. And if you own the video, you can actually go into YouTube and manually add captions. Don't trust YouTube's automatic caption generator because they're often wrong. A good workflow is to have the automatic caption generator try to detect captions and then go in and improve those. I've never actually gone through that workflow, so I can't walk you through it, but that's probably sort of where you need to be aiming. And if you are going to have a video, prefer to have a talking head video rather than a video with action in it. A talking head video is where the physical things happening in the video are not very important, and it's just the words that the person are saying. So if someone So just someone talking at a camera, a video of a lecture, those are just talking head videos. And if you do a video, if you can provide a transcript also on the page. Lastly, try to use web pages and not files. Try not to attach Word files or PDFs on your page itself, and that's because it's easier to make web pages accessible than files accessible. It's possible to make Word documents and PDFs accessible, but it requires time and effort. So if you can put your information on a web page and not a file that someone has to download, if you do need to have it in a file, sort of investigate ways to make the PDF, make it a PDF, and then investigate ways to make the PDF accessible. It probably requires a couple of hours and a copy of Acrobat Pro. If you'd like to have some resources on the web to find out more about accessibility, usability.yale.edu is a great one. w3.org/WAI is sort of the Internet's official accessibility page, and by the Internet I mean the W3C group, who are the people who are responsible for setting the standards for the Internet. WebAIM.org is a nonprofit that's devoted to helping people understand what accessibility is and how to achieve it. A couple of other universities also have really great accessibility websites. Accessibility.psu.edu for Penn State is one of the best. Another resource you can use is the Wave toolbar, which is a Chrome extension that will attempt to automatically detect accessibility problems on your web page. So if you want to install that on Chrome and use it, you're welcome. WebAIM also has a color contrast checker so that you can tell if your color contrast is sufficiently high that a colorblind person can use it. You enter in 2 hex codes and it tells you the contrast level between them. You want to shoot for a level ideally above 7:1, but at a minimum of 4.5:1 for contrast. That was a lot of information. I do have a few time for questions. One question that I should get, but I haven't gotten, so I'll ask it to myself, is Yale Sites accessible? And the answer to that is it's complicated. You can't, Yale Sites is a platform, it's not a website. And so have it being a platform, it can take you pretty far, but if you take your Yale site and you abuse it in the ways I've told you not to abuse it, then your website will be inaccessible. So using a platform like Yale Sites, which Yale ITS has committed to making accessible as possible, is probably a necessary part of your strategy, but it's not a sufficient part of your strategy. You have to use Yale Sites and you have to put good content sort of on it, or you have to use a different platform that is accessible and you have to put accessible content on. Yes? WordPress is any content management system itself is not going to be strictly accessible out of the box. So if you download a raw copy of WordPress, or if you download a raw copy of Drupal, probably not. You have to think about the distribution, and you have to think about the particular WordPress provider. I can't speak with any authority about Campus Press, which was one of Yale's WordPress providers, so I don't know about that. So it depends on where you're getting your WordPress from. So I would ask whoever is giving you the WordPress itself.